pinta dragón, pinta guacamayo, pinta fénix, pinta yagé, pinta guacoya, pinta guachonita, pinta San Pedrito lleno de poder. Pinta dragón, pinta guacamayo, pinta fénix, pinta yagé, pinta guacoya, pinta guachonita, pinta San Pedrito lleno de saber.
And all those stars, if you look out in the sky, is a firework display like you see on the 4th of July, which is a great occasion for celebration. The universe is a celebration. It is a fireworks show to celebrate that existence is.
What's going on out there, everyone? Thomas Sakowitz here from Hugs and Universal Solutions. I hope you're all having an excellent day out there today. Want to start out first by saying, you know, super grateful for you being here and choosing to take part in this information that we're just now coming out with, and it's been a really amazing journey, and you know, a little testament to what we're doing here. This is maybe like, I guess like the third time or so that
this is the fourth
attempt at recording this webinar right now, and a lot of things have come up, and what we realize is these energies and the archetypes and the alchemy that we're working with is on such a profound level that in order for us to be able to transmit this energy and these frequencies to you properly, there have actually been needing a certain type of ceremonial energy work that has to take place, particularly through me and Danielle, but also on some other levels too. So basically we've been, you know, just allowing these energies to work through us and to mutate us and to allow us to grow so that we can transmit the energy as best as possible. And essentially, the transmission here, the name of the webinar is Through the Eyes of the Gaian Child. And so what we're going to be doing here in this webinar is setting the intentions to move from chaos, a state of chaos, into innocence. And basically, we're going to be explaining a lot of different symbolism, what we call archetypal languages, and we're going to be explaining how we can use those, among other things, as tools to participate in the collective evolution that's going on here on this planet, allowing these energies to transform us and also us to transform them. And a big focus of this particular webinar will also be the idea of the judgment mind, the victim mind, or kind of like a collective virus that has been present in humanity that isn't to be demonized. You know, the ideas of the AI or archons, aliens, these sorts of things, but actually transforming it by seeing the purpose that it has here, and allowing that to be used as a tool to lead us back to our state of integrity and into a state of you know, connection with our own soul and divine source in the collective.
Yeah, and we're going to kind of put it into like a story, like allegory or metaphor, so that we can all have a deeper understanding, you know, as to what's really going on, because there's a lot of different energies going on the planet within each one of us, and there are ways, and we want to share that with you today to actually have a deeper understanding and be able to like read the energy and what does that mean, and you know, what are archetypes and things like that. So in essence, we're getting into our like cosmic body, and this is really what expansion is. I want to go over like a few terms that people, you know, some of these terms have been a little bit diluted. You know, you hear people say like ascension, like, you know, we want to go ahead and clarify what a lot of these things are in archetypes, because it's not like we have to leave our body, you know, if we're going to ascend and all these things. It's about really working with the energies that we have present, to serve the collective and ourselves. And this is through something that we call like light language. And it's interesting because, you know, even when Tom and I were kind of putting together this webinar, it's like, well, wait, what really is light language? It's such like a vague term, you know. We've been studying several different systems from astrology to I Ching, a lot of these different divination systems. They correlate energies that are happening at different levels, like the macro level, and how they correlate to the micro level. So astrology really is the divination or the reading of the energies of the cosmic energies and their influence. Well, not necessarily influence, but how they're tied together with the micro, because everything is connected, and it's about returning back to a seamless integration. And that's really what this whole thing is about. So we've been terming this like archetypal language, or you can call it light language. And what that means is using this language that speaks to the subconscious, because archetypes and symbolism, they're, you know, part of our culture, and how humanity has a different understanding. We're all using it already, you know, and how we can use these type of languages to really grasp what's happening and make deeper sense and know what decisions to make and when. Now, archetypes are things that are like energetic capsules that have these broader meanings that you can't start to define with like the intellectual mind, because as you do, the essence of the archetype starts to really like slip away. So archetypes are energies that are evoked, not necessarily like, you know, picked apart and things like that. And these are the blueprints of our reality. We know that the reality has, there's like a divine order. And all these energies are coming through our cosmic body. So when people talk about auras, it's not just an energy that's emanating from your body. It's actually aspects of your entire body that are picking up different stimuli and information on several different levels. And that's really what perception is. You know, if you're wanting to expand or ascend, really it's about taking as much sensory input as you can and bringing it into consciousness. So normally, because we are receivers, okay, like our brain is there to filter out and create a story of what it thinks that we should, you know, gather from the environment, but really we're collecting it all, okay? So we want to, in turn, choose what we're collecting and what we're receiving by taking the sensory input and reading it through these different archetypes and energetic influences, symbolism, and things like that, and bringing it into our conscious awareness so we choose, you know, what sensory input is important, because there is a lot of things that we've been conditioned and, you know, through society and things like that to say, like, you know, that's not important, that doesn't exist, you know, the spiritual realm doesn't exist, energy isn't real, you know, all these things. But really what we're finding is that it's a seamless reality. Like, all these influences are taking place and we have the ability to read them. So using these different systems like astrology can help. You know, we integrate it with what's called the gene keys, which is a system that was developed by Richard Rudd. And the gene keys is basically a system that overlaps with the I Ching. So it's 64 archetypes that correlate to like your genetic codons, which are in our junk DNA, which we'll get into that later. And you hear people talk about DNA activation and shadows and things like that. We want to take the archetypal shadows, because each archetype has a shadow frequency and what is called like a gift frequency, or like a higher elevation that when we pull it in and we accept responsibility and we shine light on it, because a shadow is anything that we say, no, that's not us, that's not us, that's something else. we're the victim. You know, those are things that we need to start to like transmute. And, you know, once we do that, we can work with the archetypes and use all these systems to, you know, pinpoint specific ones that we're working with so that it's more comprehensive and available to us. Yeah, so I know, Tom, you wanted to talk about like the sensory gating. Like I was stating, you know, the brain, it's like a receiver, okay? So it brings into our awareness like consciousness, right? Because sensory input comes in, we bring it up into consciousness, and that's what we experience. But like I said, everything is going on around us, and we're only picking up a small amount of it. So Tom's going to tell us a little bit more about like sensory gating and what that is.
Yeah, so essentially sensory gating is a term that's used in psychology and in science to really describe the process that our brain and our nervous system goes through to filter out sensory stimuli. So within the environment that we're in right now, there's always all kinds of sensory stimuli coming into our brain and our body. We hear and we see and we feel a lot more than we're consciously paying attention to moment by moment. And sensory gating is a mechanism that they've done studies to find out that in particular patients that have different like mental disorders, things like schizophrenia or PTSD and these different sorts of things, they found that the sensory gating is actually malfunctioning, so to speak. And
it's letting in too much.
Yeah, basically it's letting in too much information, or maybe the wrong information at wrong times, and things like this. There's also been studies that have done to show how sensory gating plays a big part in what happens when entheogens are used, different plants or even breathing techniques, things like this, so that where basically the chemical composition in the body changes, so this directs the body to take in different sensory stimuli, like the neurotransmitters in our brain play a big part in this, things like serotonin and dopamine. So then again, all of the plants that have an effect on this have an effect on that sensory gating, like even caffeine, for example. This is why they say caffeine is the first nootropic, because it allows us more attention and more focus on different things at one time, but yet it can also be chaotic if we're not, if we're overloaded or taking it in an incorrect manner.
It's kind of like a muscle or like an astral organ. As you're learning to open your perception, you have to start to unlock these different gates.
Exactly.
And once you've unlocked one, then you know what that's like, and you can keep like unlocking them.
Yeah, exactly. And so what these archetypal languages do is they give us a framework, kind of like a software for interpreting this sensory information as it comes in. Because, just for a second, like, we're talking about this kind of like an astral organ, but to give an example of like how it works in like digital technology, for example, I think is a great example. Like if we buy a computer, right, we can kind of compare our body to kind of like a biological organic computer. And if we get a computer and we don't have a web browser, we can't surf the internet because the software isn't there, right? And then once we get the internet and we get an internet browser, then within that internet browser there are different languages and things to interpret the code that people have on websites and stuff. So these languages allow us to process this stimuli in a way that's ordered and coherent rather than chaotic, because on the other end, we don't want to slip into these areas of, psychosis and things like that. And as the evolution of humanity increases, our biology is naturally taking in more of these new types of information. We're going through periods of evolution. So we want to counteract and complement that with also learning new languages so we can become participants in this evolution.
Right, yeah, exactly. And this is a way, like you're saying, so we can actually be conscious participants, because we're being participants whether we know what's going on or not. You know, and it's a different it's like a different way to read the energy. You know, we can see things with our eyes. You know, these are all these senses, and there's like another sense, like an astral sense, for, you know, reading these different energies that encounter us, and they come through, you know, different scenarios. They come through different people. They come through like different feelings that we have. You know, and we can identify them if it's like a shadow state, or, you know, what is the root cause of it, so that we're not entering into situations, you know, at like an angle in the geometry of the reality that's going to cause us to make decisions that aren't the best for, you know, our path.
Exactly.
So in a way, this is really becoming multidimensional. Like, we are already all multidimensional, and we have these capabilities. And, you know, as you see like the rise of like the Schumann resonance, if you're not sure what that is, like, definitely look up the Schumann resonance. It started, I believe, in like the 1970s. This guy, scientist Schumann, like, he researched, I believe, like the frequency of the planet, you know, like the normal range. And like this past Easter, because before Easter, it was at like, I don't know, it started in the 70s, it was like 7.8 hertz or something, and then it like was slowly going up over the last like 30 years, you know, up to like 10, 12, I think. And then on Easter, it jumped up to like 90, which is way off the scales. Like, they didn't even have like that, you know, increment in there. And then it went up to like over 100, like within the last couple weeks. So, you know, the frequency of the planet is rising. So we are definitely all increasing our frequencies and things like that. And when you're able to interact with these energies and integrate them, you can almost be kind of like yourself be a portal, you know, where you can evoke and invoke these energies and these archetypes to, you know, create the energies that you really want to come out from you, you know, that's being reordered as you transmit it out, to alter your reality, because we are all definitely creators of our reality. And as we release like the conditioning and, you know, accept the shadow qualities and things like that, we're able to lead ourselves from a mind-based objective reality to a heart-centered space. And I want to say something about this too. Like, this was common knowledge like before 500 years ago. And what happened 500 years ago, before Copernicus declared that, you know, according to his calculations, which he didn't release this until, you know, on his deathbed, because he was a scientist, an astronomer, and astrologer as in his free time. And he started making calculations that it didn't make sense for the Earth to be the center of, you know, the galaxy and the universe, you know. So he, based on his calculations, even though they weren't exact, on his deathbed, he released and published his book that was stating that, you know, maybe the sun was actually the center of the universe. And at the time, it was such like a controversial subject, because the Catholic Church, you know, and before then they all believed that there was like the gods in the heavens, and they were using all these archetypal languages, and there was a lot of like constriction with religion and like authorities, and like, you know, so it allowed us to break free from some of that. That was a good thing that came out of it, because as soon as he displaced the Earth from being the center, everybody, you know, started like, holy crap, are we just like some like meaningless, purposeless, you know, beings flying through space on a rock? You know, it's a huge, like literally earth-shattering, you know, potential finding that led to a revolution in science and everything else. You know, everybody started going, okay, well, wait, like maybe we cannot trust, you know, our spiritual aspects or the gods or the religions. Like, these things aren't really right. We need to like let's just look at what we can see, hear, touch, smell, like just the five senses, and what can be measured. And that's what led to, you know, the over objectification of the world, where it started to, you know, go down this really narrow path of, you know, kind of taking the spirit and like the enchantment out of life and to where, you know, we are today. And then something else happened too, is like Freud displaced the self, you know, the center of our self, and gave it over to the subconscious. So that was like another shocking thing. We were like, oh crap, like we're not even in charge. You know, it's like our subconscious. We're like, you know, playing out our conditionings and things like that, which to a degree is accurate. Um, even
Which
though
is really like it's like that's the fear too, that chaos, that chaotic energy stems from, is the fear that like no one's in control, or that, you know, the human being is totally powerless in all of this stuff that's going on.
Right.
Religion and science both have their own way of doing that. It's like religion's like, well, you know, like it's all up to God.
Yeah, put your trust in God, don't question anything.
And then science goes, oh, it's all genetics. You know,
Right.
that you don't have any control. You know, you're born how you're born, and that's it.
Uh-huh.
You know?
Yeah. So before all that happened, before Copernicus, you know, displaced the Earth as the center, you know, there was a lot. I mean, astrology was huge. Astronomy, it like led to astronomy. They developed astronomy to help with understanding astrology. You know, and so the good things that came out of that, like I said, we had like the scientific revolution. We had like an increase in technology. We broke free from like, you know, religious like over domination, and like, you know, a lot of things came out of it. But then the fall of man really was like, you know, you see a lot of people that think that watching football is their purpose, and like, you know, like going to Walmart is their purpose, and like things that like they don't have a purpose. It's like insignificant. And when we don't have a purpose as a species, we see what that's done to like our planet and everybody, you know, like what's going on. It's just not a good situation. So now we're trying to reintegrate and take what we've learned from the revolutions and reintegrate into the whole, and be part of it again. And we can see a lot of this is like interacting with these energies, because life really is like a ceremony. Like everything is sacred, everything is communicating, everything has a purpose. You've heard all these cliche things, everything happens for a reason. You know, and it's all in how we respond and interact with these different energies. So as part of like an analogy or like a metaphor, when all this happened and we displaced all this, you know, energies and understandings of the world, we then placed our brain in charge, you know, and that was like the nucleus, and it was a competitive reality where we're all just a bunch of like cells, you know, but being competitive, where, you know, if that were to happen in the body, we wouldn't exist. So we're transferring from being a competitive nuclear brain-centered cell to a multicellular, you know, cooperative
Organism.
being, yeah, organism that, and that's where we're taking the communication from the brain and placing it into these outer, like kind of like a plasma membrane or a cell membrane would
The aura.
Yeah, that's kind of like the aura or the other energetic bodies. And that's how all these people, you know, are having telepathy and like dream symbolism and different, you know, what they say supernatural, even though it's definitely natural to have those abilities. So we're getting back into that, and becoming more in rapport with all the energies. So yeah, why don't we talk about, let's talk about more about like the cosmic body, because we really want to correlate this on a macro scale with like if there was a being, you know, like what's really happening, what are we all creating together?
Yeah. So to touch on that a little bit, you know, I want to add a few points about what you were just saying too, about, you know, when nature when nature, you know, creates a new organism or creates life, basically we found that it starts out with the brain and the nucleus, and then eventually through quantum biology we found that when the organism starts to hit a certain point, like after all the energy has went into the competitive nature, because the competition creates a state where the organism can actually flourish, because this way it's driven to but yeah, so essentially, you know, what we've found in the way that biology works, in the way that nature works, is that when an organism first starts out in nature and cells are reproducing and growing, it starts out in this kind of competitive nature to ensure survival of the organism, because the cells, when the brain or the decision making is centered in the nucleus, then it's in this competitive nature, so it makes sure that, you know, as many cells as produced are possible so that the organism will survive. But then through quantum biology, what they found out is that at a certain point, when there's kind of like a you know, a certain plateau is reached, that life starts to become more cooperative, because a certain stage in the organism is reached, and now the organism figures out that it makes more sense for the whole organism to work together rather than competing with one another. And they call that basically emergent behavior. And at these stages of emergent behavior, this means something totally new is produced, right? So the sum is greater than that of all the parts, and this is found on many levels. So it's like the emergent behavior is like, you know, normally if you were to have hydrogen and oxygen, right, and together it's just hydrogen and oxygen, but when a certain reaction takes place, then it will become water. This is called emergent because there wasn't any water or anything before, but now that's a totally new element or a thing that's produced by those certain types of combinations, right?
Well, it's like they're sharing resources, because they're like sharing electrons, and that's how they bond.
Exactly.
So it's like they are being more cooperative because they're like sharing the electrons.
Exactly. And then like another example would be like in plant life, right? When they've studied these different leaps in evolution, where all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a totally new feature to a plant just comes into existence. There's no like graded stages. It's just like all of a sudden something is produced, and it's doing this because it's reacting to the environment, and it's producing something that it needs out of necessity to come back into harmony and balance with nature. And so yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about this cosmic body, or the collective organism, right? So through advances in new theories, in such as like the electric universe theory and plasma cosmology, basically these theorists have been finding that if we look at electricity and magnetism and plasma, we can actually explain a whole big group of all of these different things that take place in nature that up until this point science has just been you know, kind of guessing a lot, and like they come up with these concepts that kind of connect the dots, but yet then still have these big missing holes. And so in plasma cosmology, it actually explains a lot of the mythology as well, because, you know, in ancient times there's all these stories about, you know, the great dragons flying through the air, these different, there's the idea of the rainbow serpent and the cosmic serpent, and the great dragon in general in these mythologies. And so before I get into this too much here, I want to share a video with you all that explains a little bit about plasma cosmology, so you guys have a little better idea.
What does it mean to say we live in a plasma universe? And why is the plasma universe an electric universe? We typically describe matter as solids, liquids, and gases. But across the cosmos, plasma is the most pervasive and fundamental state of matter. It's the electrical behavior of plasma that assures us there is no empty space in space. No domain anywhere is entirely free from electric and magnetic fields. That's the reason for our oft-repeated mantra, there are no islands in space. A continuous electrical conversation occurs everywhere. If we're better at detecting this energetic conversation today, that's because advanced instruments give us a much closer view, and not just across the sliver of visible light on the spectrum. It's freely moving charged particles that give plasma its electrical characteristics, including its conductivity. Electric currents are essential to comprehending the new picture of space. Electrified plasma creates surprisingly lifelike responses, and it creates similar behavior at all scales. From microscopic up to galactic dimensions, the responses to an electrified environment are fractal-like. Plasma in the lab, plasma in computer simulations of charge, and plasma structures in remote space show virtually identical geometries. So it's the plasma universe that makes our electric universe possible. Now it's the job of astronomers, astrophysicists, and mathematicians to take up the challenge. How far can the discovery of the electric universe take us in our understanding of events in space, events close to home and in the farthest reaches of the cosmos? One thing you can count on is this: the story of the electric universe will continue at thunderbolts.info.
Cool. So, yeah, I do want to add, really quick, if you guys want to know more about the science behind plasma cosmology, electric universe, thunderbolts.info is a great place. You can Google plasma cosmology. Also, our good friend Daniel Winter at Fractal U and goldenmean.info is doing a lot of great research and experiments that kind of start to prove a lot of these different theories. And so then what I want to do now is kind of immerse you guys into a little bit of a story. And so I want you guys to imagine for a second that you are, you're the only being that exists, right? Think of this as like a primordial space or a primordial goo that you're an eternal, all-powerful creator being, right? And this this primordial space, imagine for a second, because it is all things and it is everything that exists, it has this feeling of a desire for a co-creator or a child in all this, right? It has a desire to experience something new and something different in its existence. And so in order for something like this to happen, in order for this beautiful being, which has been given many names over time, we can just look at it like the universe if we want to, right? But this primordial space, in order to create a separate being or an other, would have to essentially create this being out of its own substance, right? If you're everything, if you want to make something new, you're going to have to use a portion of yourself to create this thing. And so in order to do this, imagine that you would have to basically invert a portion of yourself to create a space for this being to grow into experience, right? And you would have to set up the conditions perfectly, because you wouldn't want this being to just be a copy of you, and you wouldn't want to have control over it. Otherwise, there's no newness, there's no experience, right? You're just playing out something like a movie where you already know the ending. And so we can think of this inversion of this portion of the self kind of like we would imagine like a torus donut, right? So this tunnel or tube or like umbilical cord, so to speak, inverts inside this being, this primordial space, and then it needs to send the spark of life to interact with it and to co-create it. And this spark is very much similar to the electricity that charges plasma, right? And we've now seen, if we look at these pictures of the galaxies, especially the galaxy we're in, we've seen evidence of these plasma arcs coming out of essentially like a white hole in the center of the galaxy. We can look at this white hole like the umbilical cord coming from this primordial space, or the entrance of energy and life-giving substance into this womb that we're inside of. Okay, and I want to show too. I'm going to pull back. Okay, so what we have right here is a picture of a plasma discharge from a plasma gun, right? And so in the center, imagine this is like the tube where the electrical charge comes down this tube, and then the energy bursts forward from this plasma gun, right? And then on the bottom of the corner of the screen here, we have this is like the human eye, obviously. And we notice here we see the exact same patterns. And why do we see these same patterns? Is because this electrical magnetic charge and the way that it interacts with each other is taking place in the same way on all levels. So this up here is the same way which plasma interacts with the environment at the level of space. And then on the left, we have the way that plasma interacts on a human level. And this is why we have the synchronicities here being between blood plasma, which contains our DNA, and then plasma we know in space, which is basically the fifth state of matter, right? And so this is what I'm doing here is I'm showing correlations between what's going on in the macrogalactic scale and what's going on within our body. And this is also why we find on a galactic scale, we also find that there are all the similarities in the way, exactly, it's been found the exact ratio in the curvature that the planets follow around our sun, and the curvature of the helix within our DNA as well. I'll show you guys another really quick video on that. And so this here is showing, I'm going to have to restart that video too. Okay, so this here is showing, now I know you guys have maybe seen pictures a lot of times of the planets rotating around the sun in this kind of flat elliptical orbit. But we know that the sun is actually traveling through space. All the planets are traveling through space at something like 77,000 miles an hour or something like that, I think I read recently. And so what this is showing is how the planets actually travel around the sun, and the sun travels through space in the exact type of fashion that our helix is formed within our DNA. And so what this is doing, once again, is this is showing correlations between why these astrological energies playing out between the planets and the stars and the galaxies, why they affect us on a very personal and intimate level through making changes and effects within our body and our DNA. And so what this is also showing here is, in astrology, we have what's called the dragon's head and the dragon's tail, and this is the lunar nodes, of course, okay? And I think what we can see here is the reason that the lunar nodes have such profound changes in our world and why they impact us so much is because this was an allegory, once again, to this dragon, this plasma dragon or energetic spark that's coming out through gamma radiation, through all sorts of different energies that are sending out from our galactic center and then transmitting through the stars into the different planets and creating all of these changes, or co-creating all of these changes, right? Because that's the thing, is this womb that we're inside of, basically when it allowed this being or this new energy to be created inside of it, it actually surrendered a control or a portion of itself in allowing something to be in this womb, right? Just like a mother does to a child who is within her womb. The mother doesn't have control, so to speak, over the child. The child is in a safe environment, much like like a simulation or something, preparing the child for the world that it's going to enter into. And there are certain codes that dictate the formation of the organs and the glands and all of these different sorts of things. There are codes in nature that make certain things start at certain times, but the mother is not in control of everything, right? It's still, creation is happening in this new and different way when the child is developing in the womb. And we also know that the things that's happening to the mother have a certain amount of influence on how the child develops these energies. Once again, even the astrology, nature, the mother's mood, these different sorts of things. And what the child does actually influences the mother as well. We've seen cases where the child's chemistry and biology can actually heal a mother who's sick in different instances. This is why stem cell is such like a big thing that we're getting into, because that new spark of life that's created in her, and that growth, the chemistry that's happening in the child has the ability to profoundly affect the mother. And then we know that there's all these different interactions that are going on, right? And so this is, this is a great way to explain everything from the galactic universal scale all the way down to the personal, the micro level. And these archetypes are allowing us to translate or consciously understand these energies and these biological reactions that are going on, so that we can participate co-creatively with everything. And that's why that's why a big part of what we do is centered around Richard Rudd's gene keys, because this is such an amazing system that he's intuited and created, because it shows how these archetypal energies do affect us, and we're participating in this evolution on a cosmic scale, because these energies, these archetypes that we can invoke, can create chemical changes within our body. And these astrological changes that are going on do create chemical changes in our body, right? But this is giving us a language to participate in that, because, I know you've all had before where there may be some sort of feeling or some sort of situation or something that happens to you that you just can't describe correctly in English, right? Well, these systems allow for us to properly communicate that, and to even enter into an interchange with one another in the whole organism that's being created here, because that's exactly what's going on in this time. Is we're going through an emergent level in evolution, where we're going from brain-centered decision-making to membrane-centered decision-making, because the thing is about the brain is that it can make any decision it wants to, right? Like, I can make a decision right now to go out and eat rocks or something, right? Like, if my brain's making decisions, I go out and I pick up the rock and I start chewing on it. But that's not good for the collective organism of my body, right? I'm going to ruin my teeth, I'm going to ruin my digestive system, and it's not going to be good for me. Because the brain can somehow come up with an argument of why I would want to do that. Because you can take any decision and come up with equal arguments for doing it or not doing it, right? And
it's what creates the duality.
Exactly, it's what's creating a duality, right? But then the body, if we go down into the form or the solar plexus or the cell membrane, so to speak, what this actually does is allows us to tap into the whole being, right? So the liver, the heart, the digestive tract, and even now moving in beyond to all of nature, into other humans around us, we can tap into this certain authority within us, this certain spot in our body that will make decisions that take of all life into account, right? It will tap into all of our organs and glands and make this almost infinitely intelligent assessment of like, oh, do I have enough energy to...
Well, it's tapping into all those energies that are received through the bodies, you
Right.
know? So it's
the
like,
sensory gating.
because it gets everything, you know, the mind is the only thing that is filtered.
Exactly. And so this is the sensory gating taking place, right? So by tapping into these new channels, these new gates of energy, and giving them a way for our conscious mind to be ordered and interpret them properly, we can then basically surrender into the intelligence that's going on in the collective level. Because the mind, you know, just saying, okay, I'm going to surrender, right? Like, the mind will fight back usually in these states, right? If the mind doesn't have...
The mind wants to be in control.
The mind wants to be in control. So if we can give these systems to order the mind in a certain way where it basically kind of like willingly gives up control because it sees the pattern, and we activate the prefrontal and the frontal lobe, where these holistic thinking and these holistic systems can actually start to be activated and take place, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's important too to understand that these systems do not create changes on the other levels. Like, it's just showing that they're all interconnected. Like, so astrology does not create changes here. Like, because the planets go here, it's showing the interconnectedness, just like in quantum physics, when you separate, you know, particles of an atom, and you put one particle over here, one over here, and you affect this one, it starts to affect this one, you know? So it's showing that there's like interrelatedness between it. You know, an important thing to know too, because we're seeing through these systems, and by adjusting our decision making, that there really is an interrelatedness. That's what it's about. It's not believing in archetypes. It's not believing in energy, because science has shown that, like it was even saying in that video, that there's actually a lot more going on between the space. So we used to believe that, you know, it was matter that defined space. So, you know, you would see like different particles of matter, or like, oh, there's a chair and there's a table, and then that's what created the space between it, you know? But really what they're showing is, and Nassim Haramein too, he made like a good point for you to kind of invert your thinking about it, was rather than thinking of matter defining space, thinking about how space, because that's where everything, like 99.99%, 0.9999999, there's like so much going on there, and then it's only 0.01, you know, like very minimal that we're actually registering with our eyes and our senses. So he proposed like, well, maybe it's space that defines matter, and it's all through frequency. So it's like a continuous, it's not just like there's space and there's matter. It's like there's space, and then at like a frequency, it becomes into matter, you know? So but there's like all this other space behind it that is like kind of like pushing it into kind of like, that might even be like the creation, you know, like what's coming in and from the primordial space, like what's being developed. And now we're being conscious, you know, starting to become conscious of what's going on. So I just kind of wanted to add that in, that, you know, these things are not about beliefs. You know, it's really just reading it, understanding it, using your own intuition so that you can tap back into your own internal authority to be your own leader, so you can rise above the conditioning and the over-objectification, so that you can have, you know, your own relationship with what's going on and feel good about it. So yeah, if I just want to explain a little bit about the gene keys really quick. I know that he was talking about it, and it's by Richard Rudd. He's one that developed the system, and it correlates with the I Ching, which the I Ching is a system that kind of patterns the elemental combinations. So just like astrology is the correlation of the planets with, you know, the micro, here on Earth and other energies. The I Ching is the elemental combinations and their influence on the reality and those patterns, and they correlate to the DNA and what is called our junk DNA, which, you know, science has found out that 99.999% of our DNA is junk, apparently, you know. So these are the latent, dormant codes that carry all of our memories of all of the lifetimes, all the energies, everything, waiting to basically be activated. So when you hear people talking about DNA activation and things like that, we have the ability to activate these codons. And in this system, the gene keys, there's 64 archetypal energies, and like I was stating before, each one has a shadow, which is the lowest frequency, and there's ways to determine if you're in the shadow. And it has what's called a gift, which is like the next highest frequency, which is where you're starting to use it to be like of service. And then what Richard Rudd is terming like the divine, you know, essence or the divine frequency, he calls it the city. And that's like the highest expression or the highest frequency of the particular archetype. And this is so that we can unlock, you know, our higher purpose hidden within our DNA. And all these archetypes are, again, representing the larger energetic field that exists around us all the time. So I think Tom is going to talk about one of the gene keys that kind of influenced us and the topic of this webinar. So we can kind of go through an example.
Yeah, for sure. So today, one of the big themes of this webinar is the third gene key, which Richard Rudd calls Through the Eyes of the Child, hence the name for this webinar, which is Through the Eyes of the Gaian Child, right? So the shadow frequency of this gene key is chaos, right? And to illustrate how this works a little bit, this is what I was talking about before. I think she's laughing because of what we've been through in the past couple days.
It's been chaotic.
Yeah. So in the creation, like I was talking about earlier, you know, we had this primordial space, right? And then this being inverts a portion of itself. And there's this period that's going on, like we were talking about, where essentially there's a kind of a chaotic state, a chaos going on, because as this energy, this new energy is birthing within the cosmic womb, within creation, within this universe, there's a chaotic period because, like I said, the cell membrane or the decision making starts out in the brain, right? So this is like the chaos of these organisms fighting for survival and trying to procreate. And basically, they're learning and testing their environment. Imagine this electrical energy shooting inside of this womb, right? And now the mother's energy and the father's energy, the electric magnetics and all of the plasma, it starts to react with one another, right? And these reactions are causing life because as they interplay with each other, they're just learning about their environment. They're learning the cells are copying one another, right? And
it's orienting itself.
It's orienting itself, and this is chaotic, right? And this, again, is this belief that the human or the cell or the individual is powerless. And this is, you know, the traditional name of this I Ching or this archetype is difficulty at the beginning, right? And this is where we get the idea of the Trinity, okay? And this is the third gene key because it is the unification of these two principles. When they come together, they make the third, which is the child, okay? And the reason that there's called the gift frequency, okay, is because the gift of this chaos is innovation, okay? So as all these changes are taking place, this is kind of where this child that's birthing in the collective organism is kind of getting to this state right now, where as the membrane is starting to come online and we're starting to move into this more coherent state, we're getting really innovative, right? we've been innovative though. I mean, look at all the technologies and all these different things that have been going on because of this chaos, right? We feel like we're powerless. So what do? We create things that give us safety and comfort.
We try to solve the problem.
We try and solve the problem. So, and basically this is like, you know, this is the idea of continually transcending ourselves.
That was crazy. Yeah, we were talking about the cosmic joke. You're like, okay, so either like transcend or die. And like I like checked the recording because I saw like the cursor kind of kind of going in a circle, and it was like it just put on loop, or else you die, or else you die, or else you die. It was like really weird. Anyway, so
yeah, so the yeah, basically, so this idea, the idea of transcending or dying, is what the mutations we embrace when we embrace the kind of chaos that's going on and we allow it to mutate us. This is actually how we transcend. This is like these fears are present in our bodies and in the collective to mutate us. So we allow these fears to show us the way to the next stages in our growth, right? And maybe you want to check the audio while I do this. So I also want to talk about the programming partner. Basically, so if you look on the screen here, what I have is, this is actually a human design chart, okay? If you guys aren't familiar. As you can see, if you're familiar with the zodiac, you know, it has all of the zodiac symbols on it for this 12-sign system. And then around the edge, these are actually all the archetypes of both the gene keys and the I Ching, okay? And so we can see that each one of these corresponds to a different area on the zodiac. And so if we go here, we look at the third gene key, right?
which is on the bottom left, like kind of.
Yeah, it's on the bottom left down there.
In red.
So this is actually on the border of the Aries symbol in astrology and the Taurus symbol in astrology. And this is really interesting because Aries has always been known to be the first sign, because it's like the primal energy of creation that happens. And so it's interesting to me that this third gene key, or the cosmic child, is on that border of Taurus too, which Taurus is often looked at like the
fertility,
embodiment, the mother,
material,
the womb. You know, if we look in the Vedas, in the Upanishads, the bull, or the auroch, or the cow, is what is seen to be birthing the great mother of all creation, right? So this is, you know, interesting correlations we have here. And then in the other side of the chart there, right, if we go all the way to the other side and opposite, we see the 50th, and this is kind of in a gold color on that border of Scorpio. Brown, yeah, gold brown color on the border of Libra, which is the scales of balance, and Scorpio, which is kind of like the primal creative sexual energy force in the universe. And so we have here, it's kind of like the cosmic scales of balance have been tipped, right, when the child was created, right? So the sexual energy of creation created the cosmic child, and it's created this kind of like dualistic nature, right? But the unification of the two polarities is the child, which is the 3, okay? But anyway, what I'm trying to illustrate here is the programming partner, right? So each of these energies, if we go all the way across the circle, have what's called the programming partner, and this is the energy that kind of plays back and forth, right? They work in tandem with each other to create this interplay of energies that we experience. And the 50th gate in this case, or the 50th gene key, is values. Okay, and so this is why it's in Libra, because Libra has a lot to do with values. It's ruled by Venus. And so the 50th gate in human design has a lot to do with the pulse, the sacral energy that establishes the cosmic order. It's tribal values, traditional values, community, security, right? So once again, this is that energy that plays with the chaos, causing us to want to continually bring order back, or comfort and security, right? So these two energies play with one another, and also urge us to surrender to this new order, this change that's being created, and surrendering to the chaos and allowing it to pull us into the next stages of evolution. Mm-hmm. And so in this cosmic creation, right, basically what's happened is there's been a need for a way to differentiate between the mother, or this primordial space, and the being that's being created, the child, right? Because there has to be something that tells nature that there's something differentiated, there's something new being created, or else it would just get absorbed back into the cosmic ooze, right? It's like there has to be a code or something to show a separation. And interestingly enough, science has recently discovered that there is a virus that is present in the human genetics that causes the cell membrane, or the lining of the womb in the placenta, to function. The only reason why mammals exist in the way that they do and have wombs is because a virus has genetically altered the DNA and to allow this to happen. And basically what this virus is doing is creating this membrane that is allowing for the protection of the child, so the mother's immune system doesn't attack the child and allows it to grow and to change. And we're gonna show a quick video now on that as well.
Controlling your brain. Just kidding. Well, kind of. Hello again, Julia here for D News. Fun fact, our DNA contains a lot of virus DNA, over 100,000 pieces of it. Over 8% of our DNA is made up of so-called endogenous retroviruses, and a recent study by Lund University in Sweden indicates that just such a virus might be responsible for our superpowered Homo sapien brains. This study found that when these virus DNA bits are activated, they also activate nearby genes, meaning old viruses control our brains. Well, that there are some old viruses in our DNA that control when certain genes get switched on and off. The researchers say this suggests that retroviruses have played an important role in the development of a complex brain. Perhaps they're just one of the reasons brain cells are so complicated and versatile, giving humans the evolutionary advantage of intelligence. So, how did viruses get in our DNA? Well, you can think of them like fossils. Once upon a time, millions of years ago, one of our ancestors got a virus. Maybe a cold, maybe something else. Back then, the virus was just a normal retrovirus hanging out in the host cell. What makes retroviruses unique is how they reproduce. Retroviruses carry their genetic material in RNA. To make more copies of itself, it makes a DNA copy of its genes and inserts it into the host DNA. The host cell then reads the DNA with the viral insert and is tricked into making more copies of the virus. But by a stroke of luck, this particular virus happened to infect a sperm or an egg cell. Then when the baby developed from that cell, it carried the virus DNA in every cell of its body, and when it in turn reproduced, passed that bit of DNA onto its baby, and so on and so forth for millions of years. These viral bits of DNA become so well integrated into the host DNA, they become almost harmless. The viruses mutate to the point where they can't even function. They lose their ability to break out of a new cell and infect a new one. And eventually, they can only make copies of themselves which get inserted back into the host cell. Multiple copies of the virus gene can wind up strewn throughout our entire genome. Since this has been going on for quite a while, humans and other animals have defenses against these DNA intruders, proteins that keep the virus from replicating. It's thought that most of the time this bit of virus DNA in our genome doesn't do anything, so they become what scientists consider junk DNA. While most of these viral fossils are just DNA duds, sometimes they're harmful. They've been linked to brain disorders like schizophrenia and even might cause certain cancers, but sometimes they're kind of good. Some domesticated viral DNA functions like a gene regulator. They can tell which genes to turn on and off and when. On occasion, the virus DNA is hijacked and put to good use. We owe a lot of our success to virus DNA, and when I say our, I mean mammals. On at least 6 different occasions, virus DNA led to the development of placentas in various mammalian species, a huge evolutionary step. This viral protein called syncytin used to help host cells bind together so a virus could spread more easily. Now, this protein is responsible for the lining in the placenta that helps nutrient exchange between mother and developing fetus and protects the fetus from the mom's immune system. Studies show that these viral genes matter a whole lot. When they're turned off in mice, embryos don't survive. So we're a little bit viral. That's kind of cool. And researchers think this latest study could lead to more research on genetic links in certain diseases of the brain. Most of the research on genetic factors for disease focus on just about 2% of the human genome. Adding the possibility of a viral-related genetic link opens up a whole new range of possibilities for scientists. So what do you think of our viral inheritance? Cool?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because before we even found out about the syncytin and the lining of the womb, we actually like intuited some things, before that, and then we found out about this afterwards. We were talking one day, and basically, I had spoken to a friend, and she was really paranoid, and I was like, wow, why are people like allowing all this like fear and like these other beings and the reptilians and the same people that have taken the external gods and gone, no, that's not right, let's place the god inside ourselves, right? But they haven't decided to, they're still giving their power away to some invisible beings that even though they're doing less, they're doing more dense activities, they somehow have a less dense body and are able to, corrupt us. So we kind of thought about that, and we're like, well, what is like the AI and the archons and the reptilians, all these things that people are, fabricating and demonizing, and what are the shadows for? Like, why? Can you go close that door, actually? Why are the shadows there and things like that? Because it all has a purpose. And, when we are in the mind and we create the duality, and we're very narrow-minded, right? It's like, that's good, that's bad, and all this stuff. It creates this, like, if you think of the truth as a straight line, and the truth is our timeline. And you can think of it as like the equator on the earth, right? It makes this loop. When people place like external gods, they're putting something above them, and then they're dispersing their power and they're giving it away, and then they're also putting something below them. There's demons and all these things that they've created, so they're dispersing their power between these beings. Or really, we need to actually like pull all that together to be on the truth line, of truth, to reclaim our power. And it's the same goes if you're thinking about reptilians and archons and things like that. Like, what is the point? Like, if we're on this truth line, I'm going to try to explain this, sorry if it's a little confusing, but when we're on this line and we go, okay, there's something good, it takes us off the line, and we go, there's something bad, it takes us off the line, so that we're like in this space of like
quantum flux.
Yeah,
basically. Quantum
flux, because out here there's different timelines that are in a quantum state that are not like necessarily like concrete and tangible. Infinite possibilities, sure, but you want to be on the timeline of truth and maintaining your power and not giving it away through fear and all these different things. So we started thinking about it. We were like, well, what's the AI? Like when you start to do the good and bad thing, you create a wave. It's like a sine wave or sin. So how do we get out of sin? Because there really is no sin. We just need to like take responsibility. And we realized that like the
I was just
the table, sorry,
yeah.
the table.
No worries.
So the archons and the AI and all this stuff are basically frequencies, so that when we go out to like a duality of good and bad, out away from the truth line, that we we interact with this shadow or this frequency that we need to actually recognize, normally we're conditioned to look at it and go, oh, what is that? And like run away and like demonize it, and like, oh, it's like an alien archon thing. I don't know, just don't talk about it, and it's like really weird. Or really it's like, okay, what is that energy? What is it calling from us to do? Because everything really is like a projection. It's all interconnected. We are not separated from some other negative beings, and what we do is just like we place the God, and we realize, oh yeah, we're God too, like God is not some being in the clouds, yeah, government too, but it's like with the archons, and things like that, we need to do the same thing where we accept a responsibility. We do not fear it. We put light on it. We don't give our power away and become a victim, because that's the virus, is being the victim. And being the victim is asking us really to take the responsibility and to rise out of that. So then we started saying, like, oh, it's a virus, like all this, like the archon reptilian complex, that's the virus, this there's something out to get us, that is the virus. And the purpose of it was to show us that the only thing that we can do and what we need to do and what's being called from us is to be our own creators and our own guiding forces based on the energies that we're receiving, and to connect us to like our own source, like our source, and to find it. And we're not going to find it when we are taking demons and angels and gods and putting them outside of us. That's really not what's happening. We need to definitely stop doing that. You're giving your power away, and you're not getting it. So just seeing that and understanding that that's putting us in a victim state, we need to reclaim that power and see that these projections and these archetypal energies, if it's coming through as a shadow, when we shine light on it and understand it and transcend it, that's the power of the creator. It's to start integrating, not keep separating and demonizing. And that's coming through all types of situations, whether it's your environment, people that you're encountering and the projections that you're seeing through them, your own things that are coming out of you, and that, if you're angry and you're like putting things out, that's all projections too. So we wanted to talk about, let's get into like the 18th archetype, because that has a lot to do with what we're talking about and how to take responsibility to go from judgment, because the world really, a lot of us are living in a state of judgment, and the collective like victim mind and conditioning is really what's kind of like empowering this virus to keep kind of coming at us harder, because we're not understanding. So it needs to like put almost like more things in our way until we get it, so that we can pull these good and bad things in, so that we can build our structural integrity, through that, and get out of the PTSD loops, because we're all like kind of stuck in PTSD from feeling the disconnection from the source, because we're really being taught to, because we have the creative spark, we're being taught to connect to our own source, and that's by staying on this timeline of truth and, being a creator by pulling in all these energies and creating the torus that's pulling everything in and transcending it. Because if you're not doing that, and you're, giving your power away to these shadow frequencies and to these archons or reptilians, whatever you want to call them, you're dispersing your power, and you're not being a creator. You're going into like a negative and entropic, state that's not going to be conducive. I mean, you can do that.
Well, even simply other people, besides just like, the alien archon AI aspect of it.
Right.
It's like in our daily environment, right? We get triggered, right? We get in these reactionary states where all of a sudden we're blaming someone around us for the way we feel, or for something that's happening. Maybe we're blaming our job, our boss, the traffic, or whatever.
Or ourselves.
Or ourselves. A lot of times we blame ourselves. And really what this is, a way that we can, once again, transcend this, is to realize that all of these energies are, genetic mutations and transformations. There's energies coming through the person, ourselves, and the collective in order to transform us. We can transcend the kind of personal story, the personal sphere of it all, and see that a lot of these things are just interplays of energy that are trying to mutate ourselves and the species to the next level, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's talk about the 18th gene key, which remember has 3 frequencies. The shadow is judgment, which judgment is really good. I mean, it comes from a place of the ability to see imperfection, which is really important. It's when judgment comes from a place of being a victim or in a victim state or victimizing others that we're not really doing the right thing with the judgment. The judgment is there so that we can ultimately attain like the highest level of this archetype, which is perfection. And in the middle there we have integrity. So we go from judgment and being a victim and victimizing others and demonizing things to integrity, which is us being able to more than just hold to our values, but really to question things that don't meet our standards and like really hold things up to those standards. And then the divine perfection is thinking from the heart, because when you develop this integrity, you see that there's always more that you can do. You see that there's always more that you can perfect and things like that. So it's like this divine search for perfection that is kind of equivalent to like the bodhisattva, because we're always trying to attain and do better and continue to serve, but realizing that it's never going to really end. It's always like could always be more perfect. And a lot of this, the judgment, like I said, comes from the ability to see the imperfections, and when it's in a shadow frequency, it's very disempowering. So when you yourself are being judgmental in a negative way towards somebody else, it's also you're seeing a projection of somebody else, and you don't like what you're seeing. And this again is speaking to us on like a subconscious level, because the archetypes and the subconscious shadows that we like have the hardest time seeing are the things that come through other people. They're trying to speak to us so loudly, they're like in our face. And this archetype comes from childhood, from starting to differentiate. So just like we're talking about with the womb, and the being that's coming forth is trying to orient and trying to differentiate itself. It's starting to test and judge its environment, and its own judgment. It's starting to test its own judgment, because it's trying to develop integrity, which if you think of the integrity of like a building, it's like the structure, the strength and things like that. So that's really what's being built. And so if we look at humans and the life cycle of, when we all were between the ages of 14 and 21, our mental faculties are really expanding at that time, and that's when we started to differentiate. And our parents really played a key role in like the outcome of what happened while we were trying to differentiate. It was a very confusing, chaotic time for us when we're trying to be adults and things like that. So there's 2 expressions that the shadow can manifest as, and there's what's called a repressed and a reactive expression of the shadow. So if when you were trying to differentiate when you were a child or a teenager and your parents were not able to hold on to their integrity, okay, so they took it personally when you're differentiating, and they weren't able to stand up straight basically and kind of just stand there with it, you became a superior type of, and this would be a reactive expression. It's like superiority to like authority, superiority to like everybody else, like I'm better than everybody, like y'all suck, whatever it is. So it's not really integrated approach, and it's not a healthy, it's imbalanced, okay? So the repressed nature would be inferiority, where if when you tried to differentiate and you started testing your environment and orienting, if your parents were like harsh, and they were like trying to stop you, and they didn't know how to handle it. They, were just trying to squelch you at like every angle. You then turned that judgment inwards, and you're like, oh, I'm not good enough. Like, I'm not validated. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. So you become inferior. And wow, what is that?
It's a dragonfly.
Thing is crazy. Okay. Sorry. So anyway, so yeah, you would become inferior, like mentality, which is like the repressed nature, and that's how you would cope with things. You would start comparing yourself with everything and everybody as you are not good enough and you are inferior. So we're trying to relearn how to integrate, because a lot of us are being affected by the collective victim mind, and that's what's leading us to either be the inferior role or the superior role. And we all, you play both. Just because you have the, more often you might be like in an inferior state, you also have the ability to be in the superior state. You don't want to be really either one. You want to just hold your values and like stick with your values and have integrity and always aiming for perfection, but not in a way that comes from the mind. It's in a way that comes from the heart, which can never be like cruel. It's coming from compassion, because it's serving the greater whole. So yeah, that's a little bit about that. Did you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I think you did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So that's also going to help us to take us from the state of being like over intellectualized to the heart. And that's how we really have good integrity. But yeah.
Yeah. Now I want to talk a little bit about the 18th Jinkies programming partner, which I showed you guys before how the programming partner thing works. And in this case, it's the 17th Jinky, which Richard Rudd calls the opening of the third eye. And in the I Ching, it's known as following, right? And the way that this energy kind of complements and interacts with the judgment is on the shadow level. It's our opinions, right? And this is what happens when we see those imperfections within ourselves or the system or something around us, and then we start to write a story around those imperfections, right? This is what an opinion is. And we all have these opinions, and we develop these opinions. Once again, they're kind of imprinted on us in the first 7 years of our life, but then they really begin to form and solidify more in those teenage years, like the 14 to 21 again. And basically what's happening here is this is where we are stuck in the language forming center in the brain, the left hemisphere, where we're seeing things only in a way of division, where we're able to pick them apart, and we're not seeing in a holistic sense where everything is interconnected and everything plays on one another. In the Egyptian system, this was, the archetype for this had a lot to do with Anubis. And basically what's going on here is this is the closing of the third eye, right? So we can look at this again, like again, when we had that energy coming through the wormhole or the portal, which is in our eye. I showed you guys earlier with the plasma, right? Well, this has a lot to do with the fact that we have two eyes. Okay, so the third eye, which is the holistic center, which is as we start to go inward and we start to realize our connection to our source and our inner co-creator, we go back through this portal internally, or this wormhole, right, which is much like our birthing canal. This is what we're starting to do. This is as our third eye opens by incorporating these archetypal languages and these new symbols. We start to see the holistic nature of all this. This is the gift of this is called farsightedness. This is where we can see the way that everything interconnects and interacts with each other. This is why some points you can look back in your life and you go, oh, that's why this thing happened to me that one time. It's because I was supposed to learn that lesson. Or, when maybe we're in the middle of an argument between two people and we can see both sides. And we enter into that mode where we see the whole thing that's going on and we can kind of be that mediator and be like, well, yeah, really the way to come together is to see that this is really what's going on with you and this is what's going on with you, right?
And it's interesting too, because this is exactly what's happening when we use archetypal language.
Exactly.
Because, like I was saying earlier, like if you're narrow-minded and you're only like stuck, and this is what people say, cognitive dissonance, when they're like, oh, you're taking a far right concept and trying to associate it over here with the far left, but it's too far for them because they're only here. They can only associate between like here and here. So when we are able to make associations with things that seemingly don't associate, that's also like literally expanding and creating this farsightedness.
Right, exactly. This is really the essence of, DNA repair, DNA activation, is these energies and these new languages reorder our psyche and our DNA. And a correlation that's interesting too here in the the virus video that we showed you earlier. It says in the video that they found that these viruses mainly act in the RNA, right? So we know what the RNA does is the RNA helps to write the code. Okay, so these archetypal languages and these symbols, these are like repatterning the way that the language or the RNA, how the code is being written. So, this is also where we get the idea of like the, 12-strand DNA and these sorts of things, because as we repattern this holistic thinking, we now have the 12 aspects of ourself that can be drawn all these correlations in.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like what I was saying earlier with like the truth line and then being out in the quantum stage, just like DNA. Like there's DNA that's like written, and they say that the junk DNA is actually like in a quantum like flux, and that's like almost like we're all kind of being written into a DNA code if we're able to like, properly orient ourselves in the right geometries, where we are connected to our own source and being creative sources. And it's by being on that path, and with that we're able to be farsighted and have integrity and have innovation and all of these values to really be an equal co-creator.
Exactly. And just to show a couple more correlations really quick, we look at the spiral that I showed you guys, the heliocentric model showing how the universe, or how the solar system is moving through space, right? So this truth line she's talking about really in this case is the sun. Okay, so we have these kind of flux states.
Correlated to the sun.
Correlated to the, yeah. Well, and to show how this all is working, right? The sun, right, is also, in Spanish is called soul, which, we know this is, right, again, a reference to our soul, right? And in a lot of different esoteric cosmologies, they call the birth of the soul or body, or the birth of the soul, right?
Well, even like the Son of God,
right?
It's like sun. The son, or like the child,
exactly.
Like the son, like it's not the daughter, but the son.
Right? Again, the three, the Trinity, the child being born, and so what this is, in human design, it talks about the fact that what we are on the verge of is the birth of this solar plexus centered being. So again, that's really what all of this stuff is doing.
Which is the third.
Right.
Because the Mercury, the root, sacral, and then the solar plexus.
Exactly.
Mercury, Venus, Earth. It's like we are supposed to be like the solar plexus, which is like the heart and the emotions and like.
And Venus has the values of the community, and then Mercury is the language, so that's being repatterned, and then we finally get to the soul center, right? And what that soul center really is the present moment. That's really what it is being able to tune into the form, stay on top of the energy and be witnessing and present with all of these energies in moment by moment in perfect unison and harmony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so basically, we wanted this webinar kind of to be like an intro, like overview of kind of how we are going to be presenting things. Like we wanted to give a lot of vocabulary and introduce some concepts, which definitely if you have questions, please, feel free to send us questions and things like that. And, our main goal is to use a variety of different languages and archetypes and symbolism and things like that to explain the alchemy, which is bringing the spirit into the physical, which is what we're doing by explaining all these things. Is we're taking these broad energies and kind of bringing them into like a practical use. So we're going to be presenting other webinars in the future on like specific topics, like correlating them with the astrological alignments, including the gene keys. So it's like, all right, this astrological alignment is here, and this is correlating specifically to these shadows, which are going to be coming up. So like, watch these so that you can like work on them and contemplate them and transform them, and a lot of different symbolism and things like that, so that we can all have a deeper, really, in-depth understanding of what's happening. So that's pretty much the point of this webinar, is to really be an intro.
Exactly, and we'll also be doing other things. The goal kind of with this Patreon channel is to start to bring together a lot of these different teachings. So it's not just going to be these archetypes and these languages. We're going to be sharing with you guys, different practices, practical things that you can do on a daily basis to enter into these transformations, whether it's yoga, fasting, diet changes, channeling, meditations, all sorts of different shadow work practices.
Expanding perception, even things just like focusing outside, like on your peripheral vision is like, a way to do all these little things you can do.
Sensory gating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, even different herbs that we can use to alter our neurotransmitter levels, and with all this, we're going to be sharing it to you guys in a way that's hopefully simple and easy to understand. But we also offer some consultations too. If you guys, if you've never heard of human design or gene keys, astrology, or now you're really interested, we do one-on-one consultations, so we can like tap you guys really into your own archetypes and your own.
Yeah, we look at all the charts, and like there's like correlations between all of them, and specific things that like pop out. It's interesting too, because like we didn't know this. I knew when I saw the outline that you were writing about the 50th and the 3rd gene key, and I was like, that's my personality, sun and earth, so like these weird things like even like come up out of it, which we think will correlate with what you're going through too, because when we are moving from that like nucleus, brain-centered, what I'm finding is that when I experience something, if I'm going through like a lot of chaotic energy, or I don't know about you guys, but like the last couple of months, really since the Venus retrograde in March, it's been really intense and unstable in a lot of ways. And I find that a lot of other people are dealing with it too. There's like a lot of intense energy. And so we're taking it from being a competitive, like brain-centered thing, and we're going to this multicellular organism because we're all going through it together and experiencing something similar. And it really helps to have, a way to explain it. Even like Carl Jung, he studied a lot of astrology and art, and he like, I think he even coined the term archetype, but he also did studies on synchronicities, which is basically finding a correlation between like your internal world and like something external. And they found that it was really healing, because it was, oh yeah, I'm connected, oh yeah, there's this energy, and this really increases, if you want to say synchronicities, but it's really just acknowledgement of like what's already there, and just being able to see it. So hopefully this was helpful, and
we thank you guys so much for tuning in and participating in this all with us. We're super thankful to be able to
Yeah.
be sharing this information, and we're so thankful you guys are supporting us on our Patreon. And if you are watching this and you're not supporting us yet, definitely go check out patreon.com/hugsworld to be part of all of our future webinars and have exclusive posts and videos and stuff like that. And yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
See you later.
We have to see. We have to know.